when we allow him to pour himself into our lives, right, surrender ourselves to him, that we have to also be willing to allow him to use our lives to not hoard the blessings, right, but to be a blessing, as we hear about the life of Abraham. We're blessed to be a blessing. So Paul says that Jesus had an attitude in how he viewed himself. Why would God ask us to allow all the goodness that he pours into us to flow right back out of us into the life of others? Why would he ask that of us? Because that's who he is, right? That's the kind of nature that he has. God only calls us to things that reflect who he is. So Paul says Jesus had this attitude about himself, that he was God in all of his glory, but he didn't hold on to that. Rather, he poured himself out. He poured himself out for humanity, and he came and lived among us, even died among us. And so, Jesus did not think that being in the form of God, equal with God in this form, was something to cling on to. And I think of that like in reference to the Dead Sea, right? The Dead Sea hangs on to those Jordan waters. Of course, we're personifying the Dead Sea. It's not right? It's not human, but it hangs on to those Jordan River waters. But Jesus says, I'm not like that, right? I let the goodness of my Father that flows into me flow right back out into other people. And he displays for all mankind what God is like, that God doesn't selfishly hang on to things, good things, but he gives them up. He pours himself out. And as the Apostle Paul put it, Jesus gave up these divine privileges. And like the Sea of Galilee, fresh waters flowing in, fresh waters flowing right back out. Jesus gives up these good things that he has. And he says, I want to be a blessing. I want to pour myself out into the world around me. And so we see God coming to us, pouring himself out into us. You know, I just question for each one of us to ask ourselves, how deeply do I want to experience more of the work of God and the presence of our good God in my life? How much do I desire that? Is there any desires in your heart? Is there any stirrings that say, you know what, I want a real experience with God. I want to grab a hold of whatever that is to know him truly. And for those of you who say, I do know him, I have experienced him. Well, like, I want to know him more. I want more of that experience with him. How much do you recognize any of these stirrings in your heart? If you recognize any stirring in your heart at all that says, I want more of God, then that is the work of the Holy Spirit stirring within your life. Just after Paul told us about Jesus' attitude where he pours himself out rather than hanging on to the good things that he has, Paul said this. Immediately after, 2 Corinthians chapter 2, verse 13, for God is at work in you. He's talking to the church. And he says he helps you want to do it. Want to do what? Want to do his will. And he helps you do what he wants you to do. Paul says, listen, God is at work in your life. Any tugging, any stirring in your heart that says, I want more of God. I want to experience him. I want to know him. That's the work of the Holy Spirit. And he's given you desires, what? To do God's will. And not only to do his will, he's given you the power, the ability to carry God's will out. So if you notice desires for more of God in your life, often one of the questions we struggle with and we desire so strongly is, man, I want to know the will of God for my life. What's the will of God for my life? What's he want for me? Well, whenever you sense those stirrings in your heart and in your mind, guess what? This is the will of God. He's stirring you towards the things that he wants to accomplish in your life. He's giving you the desire to do it, right? And then he's going to give you the power to do it. So if you want the will of God in your life, tune into those stirrings within your heart and mind that are coming from the Lord. Pay attention to those things and say, okay, I need to follow that stirring of God. I need to follow that work of God in my heart, because that's going to lead me into the will of God for my very life. And as you follow those stirrings of God in your heart and these good things begin to pour into you, right? You begin to receive the goodness of God, the kindness of God, the mercy of God, the direction of God, right? The inspiration or passion of God or the love of God, all these things that He wants to pour into your life. As you begin to have those things pour into your life, then you have to say, okay, now that I'm receiving these things, I wonder where He wants to pour these things back out into others. This isn't just for me to receive and hoard. No, He wants me to pour these things back out. So I wonder where it is that He wants me to pour these things back out into others. And I love the life of Paul because, again, Paul is somebody who really understood what it was to follow Jesus, to know Him. He got it. He just understood it at a deep level. And Paul begins to use this kind of language about his own life. He says, all this goodness that God's poured into me, I'm pouring myself back out onto others. And he explains that process in his life actually results in a whole lot of joy, right? Satisfaction, goodness. So Paul, Philippians chapter 2, verse 17, Paul says, I will rejoice even if I lose my life, right? He's talking about how he's carrying out his life of faith, and he says, pouring it out. Pouring out what? Pouring out my life like a liquid offering to God. Just like your faithful service, speaking to the church there, is an offering to God. And I want all of you to share that joy. There's a deep amount of joy to be found. But did you catch the verbiage Paul is using about his life? Paul says, I'm pouring it out, my life, like a liquid offering to God. So back in the Old Testament, one of the kinds of offerings they did was literally a liquid offering. And they would pour it out on the altar along with any other offerings they were offering at the time, often animal sacrifices. So it was either wine or grape juice or something like that. And they would pour it out and offer it as a sacrifice to God. And Paul is saying, listen, I'm pouring my life out as a sacrifice to God.